is yours, is yours.
Good evening, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Temple Emanuel of South Hills, whether you are joining us in person or whether you are connecting with us in sacred virtual community. And just a quick note for those of you who are connecting with us in sacred virtual community, or at least I hope you are connecting with us in sacred virtual community. It is, of course, Friday that the internet would go down here at Temple. That is the way it always works, at least according to the Jewish version of Murphy's Law. And so we're using a couple different workarounds and a cellular signal. It should work out. You may notice a little bit more buffering than usual, but I encourage you to stick it out with us for an amazing service as we are excited to welcome back past president and musician Mel Vatz. We're joined this evening by Rabbi Meyer, and soon in our sermon Words of Torah slot, Rabbi Schiff. And we are excited to have each of you, and we are excited to have each of you as we begin our service this evening on page 10 in our prayer books. How wonderful it is we can be together tonight.
So this is the first time that Claire and I have been in Temple for 2 years. And that may be the case for many of you. So I think this is an appropriate way to open our service. How pleasant dwelling
We add to the sacredness and sanctity of Shabbat by kindling the Shabbat lights a little bit early before the sun has set, adding time to the sense of holiness as we turn in our prayer books to page 2. While it is normally our custom to invite forward honorees to lead us in the kindling of lights and in Kiddush, the sweetness of this day, there's already a little space on this pulpit, so I've asked Emily to help us with those prayers, but I would invite all of you, if it's comfortable to do so, to rise at this time to join us on page 5 as we bring in the sweetness of Shabbat together.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei uri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu mitzvotav, v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho, be'ahava.
Friends, I invite you to be seated now as we turn in our prayer books to pages 20 and 21. Our Friday afternoon text study group has begun working its way slowly through the text of a Tikkun La'el Shavuot, the all-night study packed into one period. We've chosen to break up a little bit so we could spend some more time during daylight hours with each of those texts. And we're just starting on Kabbalah, on Jewish mysticism. It is confusing, it is confounding, it is a way into accessing spirituality that exists few other places in our tradition. except perhaps on page 20 and 21. With words of Lecha Dodi, we can see into the Kabbalist mind. We can imagine how important greeting the personification of Shabbat, how important greeting God's presence into their lives really was. And as we turn to pages 20 and 21, we sing a familiar melody welcoming Shabbat into this space with us as well.
Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. La 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 la. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Shemor v'zachor b'dibor echad, Hishmihanu el Rabbi echad, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, L'shem u'tiferet v'lit hilal la 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 la. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'necha, ki mikol habracha, l'rosh v'kerem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila la 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 la. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala.
I invite you to rise now as we turn and face the entrance greeting Shabbat stanza 9.
Boi v'shalom ateret bara, gam v'simcha u'btzora, toch emunah segura. Boicha la 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 la. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. La 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 la. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala. Lecha Adoti, lekat kada, b'nei Shabbat lekabala.
If you are joining us in very real online community, I would invite you to take this opportunity to use the comment box to wish one another Shabbat Shalom. And if you are here with us in the room, what a perfect opportunity to turn to the people in your personal compass, north, south, east, and west. Wish them a Shabbat Shalom, that we might know with whom we celebrate the joy of Shabbat this evening. I'm sorry? Would you like to?
One of my favorite traditions about Shabbat is that we say Shabbat comes whether you're ready or not. And that sometimes those ministering angels around us have to pull us into Shabbat, and sometimes we get to pull them into Shabbat and make sure that we're making space for everybody to welcome in Shabbat together, making sure that we're pulling each other in for this day of rest. So we turn on page 24 to Shalom Aleichem.
As we are seated.
As we are seated.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hashem, Malachei Elyon, Yidei Melech, Malachei Amakim, Ha'aros Baruch Hu. Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech
feels like one that should just keep going as we continue to welcome, as we continue to greet Shabbat and God's ministering angels and one another. And on page 27, on the bottom of the page, we recognize that greeting need not end. It is true of spaces outside these walls and true of spaces, places, and times inside these walls. We realize that entrances to holiness are everywhere. The possibility of ascent is all the time, even at unlikely times and through unlikely places. There is no place on earth without the presence.
Yitgada Shemei Rabbi.
Amen.
Yamad Yivrach Yirtei V'yamlich Malchutei. Becha Yechon V'yomechon U'chayei Lecho Beit Yisrael. Bagada, Uvizman Karir, Vimaru, Amen. Yeheshmei Rabba Mevarach, Le'alam Le'amaya, Yitbarach, V'yishabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yidromam, V'yidnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shemei Kudesha, Brichu, Leila min kol berchata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nechemata, Damiran ve'alma, V'yimeru,
Amen. As we continue now on page 28, I would again invite you to rise if it is comfortable for you to do so.
La 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 la. La la la
page 30. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, v'chochma poteach sha'arim, uvitvuna mishaneh itim, umachalif et hazmanim, umsader et hakochavim, b'mishmerotehem barakia kirtzono, borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, umavir yom umevli layla, umavdil ben yom uvein layla, Adonai tziva'ot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. And on the bottom of page 33, would you join me in the English? Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol, all these things your Torah gives to us, and the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael, page 34 and 35.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
invite you to be seated.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, ושבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
As we prepare for our Mi Chamocha praise on page 40, would you join me in the English reading on page 41? Sing the song of men and women joined in understanding and respect, the song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come, the song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more, the song of a world redeemed, the song of peace.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedor ba'kodesh, mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedor ba'kodesh. No ra tehilot, o seferet, no ra tehilot, o
At the start of our service, Temple's internet has been on the fritz today, and it's fortunate that my cell phone had been plugged in and charged up, ready to give us the internet signal we needed for those of you who are joining online. How often those devices tend to lose their charge, and they're just not ready to go when we need them to be. So too, perhaps it is with us as human beings. If we don't find those opportunities to rest, to recharge, when the moment comes, we're not going to be ready either. And as we turn in our prayer book to the prayer on page 42, I'm reminded of the purpose of prayer to touch us, to help to recharge and refocus us to be the people we need to be in this world. For some of us, we can feel God's presence most imminently, and when we offer these words of peace and shelter, we ask God to act in our lives and in this world. And for others of us who may be feeling God at a more remote distance, we can still recognize in our prayers and in our sense of community, our time together, the model that has been set that we ourselves are supposed to follow, to work to bring that peace into this world. Perhaps somewhere between those two, between God's actions and our actions, is where that sense of recharge meets as we pray for health, for healing, for peace in a broken and world in need. Page 42.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom. V'hamidenu Shemenu l'chaim. V'fos aleinu Sukkot shlomecha, v'fos aleinu Sukkot shlomecha.
Has blown the marketplace away. There's a song on the wind and joy in the trees. Shabbat arrives in the world, scattering a song in the silence of the night. Eternity utters a day. We continue our service on page 46 with our Amidah, the central portion of our worship this evening. If it is comfortable for you to do so, I would invite you to rise and join us in song and in prayer beginning on page 46.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imateinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei HaKol V'Zocher Chasei Avot V'Imahot U'Mevi Geula Livnei Bnei למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה הכל אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיה הכל ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים והופך עולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומיתו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיה הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יעללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Would you join me in the English on the top of page 55? May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. And I invite you to take your seats as we continue with the final prayer of this section of our service, words of Shalom Rav that we can find in our prayer books on page 60.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Tasim Le'olam. Ki ata hu melech adon, lecho hashalom. Ki ata hu melech adon, lecho hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Tasim Le'olam. Tobenecha levarer et amcha Yisrael, bechol עת ובכל שעה, בשלומך. שלום רב ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. שלום רב ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. תשים
To these words that have sustained generations of our people, we add the silent prayers and meditations that can only come from each of our own hearts. We continue in a moment of silent prayer.
say shalom b'mramav,
Yaseh shalom
Aleinu ve'akol Yisrael v'yimeru amen. Oh, say shalom b'mramav, Yaseh shalom Aleinu ve'akol Yisrael v'yimeru amen. Oh, say shalom b'mramav, Yaseh shalom Aleinu ve'akol Yisrael v'yimeru amen.
On page 253 in our prayer books, we find words of Misha Berach Lecholim, our prayer for those who are ill and in need of God's healing presence and humanity's healing touch. If there are those you are thinking of who are suffering this evening from ailments of mind, of body, of spirit, I invite you to share their names aloud as my eyes meet yours, that we might concert our prayers, that we might concert our efforts and our energies on their behalf. Baruch atah Adonai Rofeh HaCholim, blessed are you, God, who brings a measure of comfort to all we have named and all we hold in our hearts. All right, Leslie, let's give it another shot and we'll see if we can get this camera. Hey, looking pretty good. Those in the room can see what those at home can see, and it was a little bit fuzzy for a little while, we realized. Though there was a 10-hour time difference between where I was in Seattle and where he was in Israel, one of the very first rabbis to reach out and to welcome me to the community when I was invited to join this community was Rabbi Danny Schiff. When this pandemic we thought was starting to break and it was safe to get together in person for coffee again, one of the first rabbis with whom I had the opportunity to do so was Rabbi Danny Schiff. You have been a source of companionship and welcome, not only as I try to navigate the city of Pittsburgh, but as together we share concerns about navigating our rabbinic organization. You are my teacher of Torah, as well as for so many in this community who have studied with you for Melton and countless other opportunities. And it is a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Danny Schiff to the pulpit this evening. I'm going to sneak off to the back and try not to cause the camera any frustrations. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi Aaron, Rabbi Emily, what a joy to finally be together in the same room that is this Temple Emanuel prayer space that you have uplifted with your hearts, with your minds, with the gifts that you have brought to this congregation. It is really quite extraordinary that you've been here a while, and because of the pandemic circumstances, I haven't, and we haven't been able to gather together. But it's my prayer tonight that this will be the start of many opportunities for us to all be in the same room together, all singing together, learning together, and attempting to do what Jews always do, which is to uplift each other through the tradition that we share. It is a delight for me, finally, to be back at Temple Emanuel. It has been far, far too long. I've seen a number of you on Zoom in various different study opportunities, and I know that when I come back to this room, it is always to be part of a sizable congregation where the feeling and the sense of involvement is always strong. I remember the last time I was here, the seating was arranged somewhat differently. I think that the seats were closer last time I was in the room, but I'm pleased to note that the usual Jewish approach of leaving the front row entirely empty, almost entirely empty. Still, no matter where you put the seats in the room, it's still too close to those rabbis. Tonight I want to talk about freedom. It's a serious subject, and it's a subject that has been very much on our minds for a variety of different reasons. And I want to offer you tonight 3 different Jewish definitions of freedom. And I want to tell you which one is the most important, because actually we have an order of preference in terms of which type of freedom is most significant in Jewish life. And the reason that I want to address the subject of freedom is not only because when we look at Ukraine, freedom is very much at the heart of our concerns, but also because It's this week's Torah portion, Bahar, that really puts a focus on freedom and has us thinking about what the real connotations of freedom ought to be, particularly within the context within which we live. In the state of Pennsylvania, the other side of the state, the other side of the Commonwealth, in Philadelphia, there is a big bell. We call it the Liberty Bell. What are the words that are inscribed on the Liberty Bell? Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10. This week's Torah portion. Proclaim liberty. That's at least the translation that we use. Proclaim liberty unto all the inhabitants of the land. The people who chose that verse for the Liberty Bell didn't know Hebrew. They decided that that would be the appropriate verse for the Liberty Bell based on its English translation. And when you think about the English translation, it's not a bad verse to put on a bell that is about 270 years old now, where you wanted to impress upon the population the importance of freedom. But the word for liberty in that section of the Torah is actually an interesting term. That word is dror. Dror. And if you look at it from a Hebraic perspective, it doesn't mean what we think it means when we translate it as liberty in English. Rashi, that great commentator of our people, said, you want to know what dror is? What the Hebrew word dror really represents? Dror signifies you can live wherever you like. Choose your physical location. Decide where you want to make your home. Now, we have just come out, please God, of a pandemic. Physical liberty, where we actually are enabled to dwell, where we can be, how free we can be physically, we discovered unexpectedly is much more important than perhaps we had ever thought about before. Being able to be where we want. Dror is the lowest form of freedom, and it means the freedom to dwell wherever you choose. That's what they decided to put on the Liberty Bell. Then there's another step up. What's the next step up? Chofesh. Dror is the lowest level. Chofesh is the middle level. What's chofesh? If you ask a contemporary Israeli, what's chofesh? Chofesh is a vacation. Chofesh is when you don't anymore have to respond to the obligations that are put in front of you. Chofesh is the freedom not to be under somebody else's thumb. Chofesh is what we sought at Pesach. When we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, chofesh was what we wanted. to be able to attain that extraordinary reality of being masters of our own destiny. Chofesh is what we pray for the people of Ukraine. That they should not have to live under the oppressive rule of somebody else who wants to impose a form of authoritarianism on their society. Chofesh, by the way, makes it into Hatikva. Lihiot am chofshi ba'artzenu. To be a free, a chofesh people in our own land. Chofesh is not drawer. Chofesh is not just about choosing where you want to live. Chofesh is freedom from anybody who would tell you what to do, anybody who would oppress you, anybody who would hold you back, anybody who would dictate how you must use your time. But tonight, I want to tell you that dror and chofesh are, from the Jewish perspective, lower level freedoms. Now, they're really important, both of them. I don't want to discount them. I don't want to set them to one side as being insignificant. But I do want to say that, Jewishly speaking, there's one more level. And that level is uniquely and distinctively a Jewish creation, a Jewish invention that I want to argue we effectively gave to the world as a whole. So the third Hebrew word for tonight, dror, was first, chofesh is second. The third Hebrew word is cherut. Dror, chofesh, cherut. In ascending order. What's cherut? So you're aware that not only have we just come out of this period of confinement where we physically couldn't be where we wanted to be, and you're aware too that a number of weeks ago we observed Pesach, all about chofesh, all about coming out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And we began to count from Pesach, counting days towards Shavuot, towards the culmination of that period that Pesach begins. And what's Shavuot all about? Shavuot is all about the receiving of the Torah. What is the most important freedom that Jews can have? From the Jewish perspective, the most important freedom that Jews can have and that every human being should aspire to is the freedom to take on responsibility. Cherut is that term which says, I, of my own free will sign on to commit myself to behaving in such a way that ultimately the world will be shaped by my free commitment to my relationships, to my tradition, to what I am called upon to do. The greatest dignity that a human being can have from the perspective of Judaism is to make the journey from Pesach from the freedom that releases us from oppression, to getting to Sinai, to being a free people that says, Hineni, here I am, sign me up. As a free person, I choose to enter into a relationship that will bespeak my responsibility in the world as a whole. We're on that journey right now. We passed Lag BaOmer this week, the 33rd day of the Omer. We're counting just a couple more weeks till Shavuot. And what I want you to consider this Shabbat, and as we head towards Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of Torah, I want you to consider that Judaism does not see the commandments, the instructions, the practices and the actions of our tradition as being a sign of restriction, as some would have it. It sees it quite the opposite. It sees it as being a sign of the highest form of liberty there is. The liberty to be responsible. The freedom to take action, to shape the world, and to mold it according to the vision of our ancestors. Draw is the lowest level. Chofesh is next. But we aspire to cherut, to function according to the lights of destiny, taking responsibility for our lives, our relationships, and the world of which we are a part. Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Leah, I feel like when we were sitting discussing what confirmation was and should be, that we should have just brought in Rabbi Schiff to fully embody that for all of our students. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for that timely message this day. We turn back in our prayer books now to the bottom of page 282, words of Aleinu L'Shabech, the bottom of page 282. When you find your page, I would invite you to please rise.
Aleinu l'shabech l'adon hakol, l'tekir l'letzeh breshit, shelo asanik haratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot hadama, shelo samcha kenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim u'mishachavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu v'ne'emar v'Adonai l'melech hakol ha'aretz bayom ha'hu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
You may be seated. As we turn in our prayer book to the bottom of page 290. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing, a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched. This evening, as we draw strength in the community around us, we commemorate the end of the period of Shloshim for our beloved Jonathan Boehm. And we remember as well those who have passed away at this time in years past, members of our congregation, and those whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. This Shabbat, we commemorate the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of David Avner, Jack N. Baver, Zola Bremen, Henry Kaplan, Paul Cohen, Henry J. Cooper, Robert David Diskin, Louise Ehrenrich, Glenn Farrell, Irvin Chick Frank, Hyman Freeman, Herbert Samuel Horowitz, Irene Kalick, Molly Carlson, Stephen N. Kaufman, Patricia Leopold, Harry Levin, Seymour Mahler, Helen Maidman, Dr. Florence L. Marcus, Meyer Moidel, Herman Moss, Carl Pittle, Nathaniel Rash, Janet Chetlin Rosecrans, Miriam Rosen, Eleanor Rosen, Esther Roth, Ethel Copeland Rotman, Paul Sapir, Louise Simons, Prudence Sternheim, Herman Turian, Nathan Turk, Milton Watsman, Bessie Wiesenthal, Eileen Wolf, Ethel Wolfson, Ida Reba Zakowitz, and Samuel Zisman. If there are others you are remembering this Shabbat, or if I have inadvertently mispronounced the name of a loved one, I would invite you to share them at this time. Yehi zichronam livracha. May the many memories be for us an everlasting blessing. As we turn in our prayer books to words of Kaddish Yatom, page 294, affirming these words hallowed by the generations, I would invite you to rise if it's comfortable to do so. Yit gadol v'yit kadash shemei rabbah. Be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon, uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, V'yit hadar, v'yit aleh, v'yit halal, shemed kudsha b'richu, le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran ba'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Osei shalom mimramav, hu yaseh shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May God, who makes peace in the highest of heavens, make peace for us and for all who mourn. And together we say, Amen. You may be seated. But a few words of thanks and announcement before we conclude our service. Thank you again to Rabbi Danny Schiff, the Federation Foundation Scholar. A pleasure to welcome you back. I understand your history runs deep in this particular pulpit, and it is a pleasure to have you with us. Rabbi Emily and Mel Vatz, it is a pleasure to have you back in the saddle as well. Leslie Hoffman, thank you for everything you have done throughout the day to make this evening's service possible. To all who have joined us online and to all who are with us in this room. Immediately following our service, we invite you, if you are with us here, to join for coffee and cookies in the foyer immediately outside of these doors. And tomorrow morning is a special day in the life of the congregation. Not only do we have our brief Shabbat morning experience at 8:30, God and internet willing, and our Torah study session at 9 o'clock, but then at 10:30, we get to hear Jonathan Williams read those very words that Rabbi Schiff mentioned as he embraces Torah from the pulpit along with 6 of his peers who have been studying the service, who have been studying Torah to prepare to lead the congregation. As adult B'nai Mitzvah, it is a pleasure to get to celebrate with you and indeed your cohorts tomorrow, and I am so excited. For now, though, we turn in our prayer books to page 373, page 373, words of Kol HaNeshama, words of Psalm 150, with which we conclude our service.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol Hanshama Tehaleah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol Hanshama
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.